Hey, I just had some questions about teaching English as a second language in Asia. So for me, teaching English as a second language has never been my career. It's never been the main thing I was interested in. But before I ever left for Asia, I did get a certificate in teaching ESL in Canada. Obviously, I also have a bachelor's degree. So I'm a fully qualified English teacher, and I anticipated that teaching English as a second language would be something I did in between other jobs, or if I found a good situation, it'd be something I could do while learning another language. So at that time, of course, actually, I guess at that time, really, my heart was set on Cambodia rather than Laos. Various obstacles got in the way between me and living in Cambodia, but eventually I did live in Cambodia. I lived in Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Taiwan, a little bit in Sri Lanka. Myanmar is also a big part of my life, although I've never lived in Myanmar. And now I'm living in Yunnan, China. I lived here previously, 2007, 2008. Look, the very end of my time living in Cambodia, earlier I had been doing humanitarian research, so research linked to the humanitarian sector, which is tremendously important work. In a lot of ways, the research is much more crucial than the hands-on element of humanitarian work. Like the hands-on element may be handing out sacks of rice. The hands-on element may be just donating money to a hospital, but then the research is going to be people finding out what happened to that money. Did it actually improve the hospital, or did it get, purloined or misallocated, misspent? Was the intervention effective? And even with sacks of rice, did those sacks of rice end up in the hands of poor people, or did they get taken away by an armed militia who then sold it for a profit? What actually happened to the rice? Even in the simplest forms of humanitarian intervention, there's a really important role for research in guiding that intervention, correcting errors, and ultimately in delivering the services that you as a charity are trying to provide. So I was doing that kind of work up to a point, and I quit on point of moral principle because of corruption and incompetence. But I quit for ethical reasons, that job. And then while we were figuring out what we were going to do next, we being me and my wife, who is now my ex-wife, I taught English in a university there in Phnom Penh. And that job, the funny thing about teaching English, it really is like babysitting children in a sense, in that the core of the job is rewarding and meaningful and wonderful and nice, And for that reason, people will horribly underpay you and horribly exploit you, and you deal with these horribly corrupt agencies and schools and institutions all the time. Now why do I compare it to babysitting? Babysitting is underpaid. Nannying work. We for whatever reason we say that in English. We say nannying instead of babysitting. Being a nanny is underpaid, and that's been studied. But one of the reasons is it's a nice job. People find it morally rewarding. The people who really choose to be nannies and stay with the job, they have other motivations. Yes, maybe maybe it's actually just caring for the child that's rewarding. But in Canada, Filipina nannies, they get permanent residency, and then they can get Canadian citizenship also. So they have careerist aspirations, and they may also be the kind of person for whom spending time with a child, caring for a child, is tremendously rewarding. At the core of that job, even in Cambodia, as horrible and terrible a place as Cambodia was to live, as terrible a place as it was to be vegan, as terrible a place as it was to try to earn a living, and the university was absolutely terrible. But in the core of that job, the actual educational role of helping people is, for me, tremendously rewarding, even in those circumstances which were in some ways the worst of circumstances. And, for the most part, I had the worst of students. My students were terrible in Cambodia. It's not the only place I've taught. I've taught English in other contexts. I would walk every day in the pouring rain, because it was the rainy season, torrential tropical rain, from the southwest corner of the city to the northwest corner of the city. So I'm sorry, I have not got a map here, but that was many kilometers. So, I don't know, let's say it was 3 kilometers in each direction. I really forget. But that was a long, long walk. They were from the one extreme edge of the city to the other. And there are several university campuses there in the northwest corner of Phnom Penh. And I would walk on the main sort of highway there, the most important road, because when it was raining like that, that was the only street that wasn't flooded. Any of the smaller streets, you'd have rain up to your ankles or up to your knees, or they would just be impossible to walk on. So I would very carefully navigate my way with my umbrella up with the torrential, tropical, pouring rain every step of the way. Now you may ask, why didn't I take a taxi? My wage was so low that if I took a taxi, it was like 60% of my wage. So the money I earned that day, 60% of it would have been spent on going to and from my place of employment. Cambodia, like many post-war societies bouncing back from devastation, had gone through a period of very rapid inflation. So the value of the money, in terms of purchasing power, had declined. And that is normal in those historical and economic circumstances. And I sat down with my boss at one point, and, I have a very good education in economics, but I appealed to real-world examples. I said to him, when was the last time at this school you increased the rate of pay per hour? And he very proudly said, never. We paid the same amount since the school was first open. And I said, do you remember 10 years ago how much a bottle of beer cost here in Cambodia, here in Phnom Penh? And he did remember. He said, yes, I remember 10 years ago. He said, I remember 10 years ago when I just moved to the city, a bottle of beer was only 25 cents or 50 cents. So that he said, and now, you're lucky to get a bottle of beer for $3. They're $4 and $5. It was something like this. This is from memory. But it really was that kind of dramatic change in the economy. And again, many third world, post-war countries going through a period of rapid industrialization, that is what happens to their currency. Beer used to be 25 cents, and now beer is $4 a bottle or something like that. Especially, and this is in the capital city. If you're out in the remote countryside, if you're out in a small town with no electricity, maybe that's another story. But the whole country bounced back and prices changed and the economy was transformed. The whole country was transformed very, very rapidly. So that's what happened. And I said to him, you're paying the same amount of money to your teachers, but the cost of rent for an apartment has gone up exponentially. It used to be that rent in Phnom Penh was $10 a month. Now you're lucky to pay $300 a month. You could be paying $500 a month, US dollars. A bottle of beer used to be 25 cents. As you said, it's $5. With him, I just used some specific examples of the things he would remember. I don't drink beer. I don't drink any alcohol. But these are just useful examples. And I presented to him a completely coherent argument that, 10 years earlier, or really more like 20 years earlier, that university was paying a living wage, was paying a good wage to its professors. But today, it was a starvation wage. Today, it was a wage that nobody could possibly live on. And as I said, I couldn't afford to take a taxi to work. I had to walk in the pouring tropical rain. And the rain was the best time to go to work because the sun was worse. In that heat, in that climate, the days when it wasn't raining, that was much worse. I preferred walking in the torrential rain. Because walking in the sun, you'd sweat through all your clothes. And I used the same umbrella. You'd use an umbrella to keep the sun off you. But it was really much more miserable to walk in the sun than it was in the rain. That's that Cambodian climate. It'll kill you. The only people who find the Cambodian climate pleasant are the Nigerian immigrants. There were guys there from Nigeria who were comfortable in that heat. But the Cambodians themselves are not very comfortable. And when you talk to Chinese people from anywhere else, of course, the Western world, it's a punishingly hot climate. Especially now, global warming has made it worse, in case you hadn't heard. Worse and worse and worse. So, in that context, and look, I'm not really, the human context has made it worse. Cambodia has a culture that combines the worst elements of Buddhism, the worst elements of French colonialism, the worst elements of communism, and the worst elements of fascism. When I say fascism, I really mean it in the sense of feudalism, the feudal heritage. But, I do mean fascism. I mean feudalism as it has been reimagined and remembered in a modern authoritarian context, which is an important part of fascism. Cambodians are arrogant. If you teach English as a second language in Cambodian, your boss treats you like shit. The other teachers, the Cambodian-born teachers, treat you like shit at any excuse. And your students treat you like shit out of sheer arrogance. And I am the very rare personality type that finds that hilarious. And it doesn't emotionally impact me at all. But nowhere else in the world would you have a student, like in Korea or in Japan, you wouldn't have a student coming into class, like a level 1 English student, someone who really can't speak English worth a damn, but someone who really needs your help, and telling you how to teach the class. But in Cambodia, that's routine. The students come in, and on their second day of class, they tell you that you're doing it all wrong. There was one little girl, she was the same age, so whatever. She was probably 19 years old. But she was really, really small. So that's why I remembered her as a little girl. But she was a very, very small, scrawny 19-year-old girl. And I remember she came in, and she told me with total confidence and total arrogance that what I was doing was completely wrong. And every day, what we should do in class is do crossword puzzles. So you know what a crossword puzzle is? It's a piece of paper with a bunch of lines, and they fill in. And that class was supposed to be a conversation class. It was supposed to be speaking and listening comprehension. So I wasn't supposed to be teaching writing at all. I wasn't supposed to be doing writing or essay writing or that kind of testing. That was their one chance to spend time face-to-face with a native speaker of English. Their other teachers were Cambodians who spoke good English, and they would walk them through. They would do more of those types of exercises, writing exercises, filling out tests on pieces of paper. But the whole point, what they were paying for with me as part of that program, it was a comprehensive program, was their time to hear my voice, speak back to me, to have that interaction. It was their only chance to try to get, speaking and listening comprehension, right, with a foreigner, with someone who speaks English as their first language. I did actually teach grammar also, but I was not grammar for essay writing, not in that class. All right. And a lot of other people would have found that, and I never stopped smiling, and I was laughing a little bit as this young woman was telling me that I was a terrible teacher and everything I was doing was wrong. And I was like, that's a really interesting idea. But and she thought that's what they should do. Every class was come in and do crossword puzzles and hand them in, and I should correct them and then hand them back. I said, if you do crossword puzzles, you never practice speaking in a whole sentence or a whole paragraph. You just learn words. So what I'm trying to do in this class is get you to speak in a whole sentence, in a whole paragraph, which of course for them is really the challenge. It's not that hard for a Cambodian to memorize a word in isolation, learn how to use it, learn how to speak with confidence and proper pronunciation. But in many of these cultures, definitely also in Hong Kong, definitely also in Taiwan, but in Cambodia most of all, they regard the English teacher as lower than a babysitter, as lower than a nanny. Even if you're teaching in a university, you're treated with real contempt. And of course, the low rates of pay reflect that. You're put in a position that most people would find denigrating and humiliating and awful on a daily basis. And there's the rain and all these other things and just the poverty. Because once you accept that job, if that's your only income, you are living in poverty as a teacher there in Cambodia. I'll never forget, there was one American guy, and on the first day I met him, it wasn't my first day of work at that university in Cambodia, but on the first day I met him, he said to me with real passion and conviction in his voice, he said, "This whole university is a joke. This whole university is a scam. And, the pay is terrible, and, the education is terrible, and, And I replied to him, looking him straight in the eye. I wasn't upset by this. I said to him, if that's true, why do you work here? Because anyone can leave, and that guy had been working there for years, and he was still working there, and he kept working there after I left. And he looked down, and before he was so confident and brash, and with the saddest expression possible on his face, he said, "I like to be able to pay my electricity bills." I assume he was another one of these shipwrecked white men, a white man who went to Cambodia with no money and married a Cambodian woman and settled down. And he probably lives with his wife's family, so he probably doesn't pay rent, because that job does not give you enough money. Teaching English at that university did not give you enough money to pay rent in Phnom Penh. It didn't. But if you live with your wife's parents in one wooden house, if you all live together and share a bathroom, then you're not paying any rent. So then your salary goes further. And as he said, you get to pay the electricity bills. And probably when you go home, probably your wife's parents also are very arrogant and also treat you in that insulting and denigrating way as part of that culture. But the core of the job is still so rewarding. Teaching English is still wonderful. And yes, some people put up with it for bad reasons. Some people do have the wrong intentions. There are guys out here teaching English just because they sleep with prostitutes, or just because they're trapped, like that guy was trapped, or just because they're drug addicts. There are a lot of alcoholics, a lot of drug addicts in the English teaching, for sure. There are terrible people. But I mean, the good people, to be blunt, the people who have more redeeming, the reason why they stay in the game is that it is really wonderful to sit down with somebody and work with them and help them. And over 3 months to see their ability in the language improve. And English as a language, it's not just a language. If you grew up only being able to read newspapers in Cambodian, and now suddenly you can read newspapers or you can read news on the internet in English, changes your life. Suddenly you have questions about history and politics, and you have a totally different perspective, so even health, whether we're talking about veganism or not. Before, you just had these weird stories your grandmother told you about what was healthy and what wasn't. And now your English is progressing, and you can start to read real science about human health in English, because it's not available in Cambodian. You can't get that information in Cambodia. It's changing their lives in a way that you get to see day by day. And yes, a lot of the students are arrogant, the majority of them can, by far, but not all of them. Not all of them are so terrible. And some of the students have, career aspirations that you sympathize with, and you want to support them, and you want to see them grow, and you want to see them accomplish their goals. There's a core to what the job is, and that really positive, supportive, nurturing relationship between teacher and student that I, as a character, in terms of my humanitarian instincts, that I love. And people, a certain type of person would be willing to do that job for free. Even in the torrential rain, even in the sun, even with your boss disrespecting you and lying to you, getting lied to by your boss. And sadly, that's why the whole industry is so exploitative. It's an industry predicated on exploiting the ignorance and gullibility of the students and the good intentions and fundamentally parental nurturing instincts of the people who would become teachers.